Hey everybody, welcome back to another 10-minute Marvel video. I'm Petter, and today, well, it's Agatha All Along. The finale has just come out, and I want to talk about the series as a whole. Kind of what worked, what didn't, spoilers, things like that. Though, before I get into all of that, I'll just say, if you're interested at all in the idea of like a good Halloweeny show, Agatha All Along is worth checking out. It's a good witchy Halloweeny show that I highly recommend. So that's the non-spoiler talk. You get 2 sentences or 1 run-on sentence there. So let's get into spoilers for Agatha All Along. So like I said, I want to kind of talk about what worked and what didn't for me. First off, I think the format of the show was really well done. This idea of the trials sets up so perfectly for television, because it gives you something to focus on each episode. I say each episode, not every episode has one, but let's see. 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 are all trials. And they work. I mean, I'm not going to say they work perfectly every time, but as a concept for a show, for the majority of the show, it works really well. And then to drop in a couple of flashback elements to the show, I think helps flesh it out. Because the show does a really good job of throwing you in with these characters. You just immediately jump in with them, and I know one of the complaints that some people had, this was not an issue for me, but I heard the complaint that why do I care about these characters beyond Agatha? And the whole point kind of was, you shouldn't. You don't care about these characters. These are random witches besides Agatha, besides the fact that we know the teen is actually Billy Maximoff or Billy Kaplan, who's Wiccan. Besides that, why do we care about Lilia Calderou, Jennifer Kale, Alice Wu Gulliver, Rio even, Mrs. Davis? Why do we care about any of them? Well, because, I guess with Mrs. Davis, we saw her in WandaVision, but the answer is we shouldn't. These are random witches that Agatha is pulling together, or Agatha and the teen are pulling together to go down the witch's road. And I can see why that would potentially be a little bit off-putting to some people, especially if you go into it with the mindset of this being a superhero show. It is a Marvel show. It is a superhero-esque show. We get moments of that in the finale, but this is really a show about witches, and I think, and kind of witches who have lost their way. So it makes sense how they build it up. It just doesn't, it's not perfectly aligned, I think, for some people with the idea that this is a Marvel show. And for better or worse, I think, actually, I'm going to say for worse, people forget that we've had other weird things, like Guardians of the Galaxy was nobody's, who became one of the most successful kind of shows. And it's very different in its superhero-iness than, say, well, anything we'd previously had before. So, well, Marvel does often have a formula. I think people forget how much and how well they can do stuff when they don't always have to follow their formula exactly. It reminds me of something that I learned in college doing creative writing and screenwriting as well. The idea was basically you have to know the rules in order to break them. You have to know why things normally work in one way to then be able to break it and subvert the expectations. And something like Agatha All Along knows the rules of Marvel, but it regularly and very intentionally breaks them to create this wonderful witchy show. Now, I did mention that not everything works perfectly. And one of the big things that didn't work perfectly was Agatha's trial. I do believe that there were elements of it that were done intentionally, but it felt like an episode that was mainly set up. In the previous episodes, previous trials, the witches who the trial were for kind of learned something about themselves and had to face some reality about themselves. Agatha does that in this episode, but it's handled very quickly, and there's no major growth or anything like that. It kind of just rushes through that trial, and I'd love to have spent another 3 to 5 minutes. Like, that's all you really need, is to spend that additional time in the trial. Let's even say spend more of that time with Agatha and with her trying to avoid it. I think that could have helped really solidify and define that character, because at times I felt like they were trying to play Agatha two ways. This idea that Agatha is caring, but also she's still the bad witch from WandaVision. And the balance was not always consistent. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't always consistent. And that, I think comes from trying to write a complex character, and they did it well, but there's probably always going to be some things that don't work perfectly. And honestly, one of the elements is people love Agatha, so they look at her and they go, we're just excited for a show about Agatha, forgetting that, like, she's an anti-hero. At best, she's the antagonist through most of WandaVision. Like, she's never a good character. She killed a dog, or got Ralph Boner to do it, and she threatens Wanda's kids. She tries to steal Wanda's powers. All these different things. So it's not like she's a good character, and in this story, she walks a line. They give her more depth, but I think in giving her more depth and the time between stuff, there may be an element where it feels like she should be more of a protagonist than she is, but I really appreciate the fact that they were true to the character, who is what's set up in WandaVision to be more of an anti-hero or an antagonist. It's just, there's work to do it. They've done it previously in Marvel with Loki, but Loki had more time, both as a bad guy and kind of the chaotic character that we then see built into the Loki show over 2 seasons. So I think some of it is just time frame with the character. We just haven't spent as much time. But I did mention another element that I really appreciated, and that was bringing in Ralph Boner in the episode where we're in Wiccan's flashback, kind of to understand the character of Wiccan, which was a really good flashback episode. I really enjoyed that. I loved the fact that the only person who's really willing to talk about all of this is Ralph Boner. Why? Because he has a unique perspective of not just being under the control of Wanda, but also having Agatha kind of break him free, influence him. I think that that's just a wonderful element to the character, and it's fun to see more of that tie-in, because they did a good job tying Wiccan in to the events of Agatha and the events of WandaVision, and kind of bridging that gap for us. So I really very much enjoyed that element of it. The final thing I'm going to mention, and I think that I liked this part, but I also didn't love this part. I thought this is the area where I thought they could have done more with the show, and that's in the very final episode, episode 9, after they're off the Witch's Road, and we get the Agatha flashback to gain, one, an understanding of kind of the history of the road, which I thought was very interesting. And I'm going to talk about, I'm going to do a separate video on the Witch's Road itself and how they handled it in the show, whether or not I liked it. But I thought that element of the history was interesting. I liked the fact that we got the Nicholas Scratch story. I thought, well, I knew we were going to get some of that. When I say I knew, we'd seen, or even in the trailers, teasers, there was footage of Agatha in period costume. There was footage of Rio in period costume. So the expectation always was that Agatha, we were going to get something about this. And there were two elements that we thought we'd see with this flashback with Agatha, and that was about Rio and about Nicholas, and we got both of them. And so we got that. But my qualm is a little bit with the Nicholas side of things. I do love kind of how Rio frames it. Like in episode 8, Agatha got a special deal, but which is basically she got time with Nicholas Scratch that she wasn't supposed to have. Nicholas was supposed to die at childbirth, but Rio gave her time. And Agatha kind of throws it back that, well, this doesn't count. Like, this isn't really enough time. It's not what I really wanted. But I appreciate the fact that it was infinitely more time than she ever would have had. And I get where both of them are making their statements from. Because Agatha, like, as a parent with a kid, if anything, heaven forbid, happened to my kid, it would never feel like enough time. That's just kind of how it works. As frustrating as kids can be at times, it would never feel like enough time. My kid's growing up. He's not that old at this point, but he's not a baby anymore. And like, there are elements of each age of a child's life that it feels like not enough time. So it makes sense from how Agatha talks about it. But it also makes sense from how Rio talks about it. and how she gave as death. She didn't do her job for Agatha, for this person that she loved. She decided to bend the rules on the natural order of things, and like the cosmic entity scale of that is really giving her such a special break that I thought they handled that well. I would have loved to have a little more time and depth of development around Nicholas Scratch, and maybe, though they did intentionally leave it open that Agatha at the end is not ready to face Nicholas again, but I always felt like there should be more with Nicholas Scratch, as much as we consistently talked about him. I was going to say saw him, but we never saw him, and he really wasn't mentioned that much. So I just feel like there was a little bit more they could have done there, and there's still more questions, which I'm going to get to in an upcoming video here. Kind of the questions that stemmed out of Agatha All Along, and if they're worth answering. Because some are going to be worth answering, some are not, but which are which? But let me know your thoughts on the series as a whole. This is one of my favorite Disney Plus series. I thought they did a great job with it, with a lot of really good storytelling. There are a few things I just would wish to have a little bit more of, but as I kind of talk through it, this is a show that has so much more good than... there's very little I consider bad in there. This has more good and enough than stuff that was good and I wanted more of. In a way, I'm going to clarify that a little bit, because there's the desire and the want more of something where it's like, okay, that was tasted amazing, like a dessert or something, like some piece of food where it's like, I want more of it, but I feel full, I feel satisfied from it. And that's it's riding the line of that and the idea that I want more of something, because I almost got full and I was almost satisfied. It's really riding that line at a couple of those points. Like I said, with Nicholas Scratch, Agatha's powers, why she steals witches' powers, and Agatha's just character depth and progression. I feel like it's riding that line for me. But that said, it is truly a wonderful Disney Plus show, and one that's a Marvel show, but also such a great witchy show. Let me know your thoughts on the show, down in the comment section below. Where would it rank for you in Marvel shows? That's probably something that Greg, my co-host of the 10-Minute Marvel podcast, and I are going to be talking about coming up. Maybe not this week, but soon, around that. If you enjoy this content, I really do appreciate it. Please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and check out the other videos that I have coming out on Agatha All Along, as well as Marvel Comics, news, rumors, trading cards, all that here on the channel. I mentioned the podcast 10 Minute Marvel. You can find it here on YouTube. Click on the channel and then the podcast tab, or wherever you get your friendly neighborhood podcasts from. But with that, we'll see you next time.